Wow, I don't think I've ever had a lead-in like that. First of all, thank everybody for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Barry Myers, the founder of Get Geeked Media. Many of you have been to our events, and I'm thrilled to be here with Acronis and to invite members of the Get Geeked community here tonight. We're here to celebrate the launch of Acronis True Image 2017 New Generation, or NG. And we've got demos, and we've got race car simulators, and we've got food and drinks. But tonight we also have a terrific lineup of speakers. We're going to be discussing blockchain, which is a real big buzzword in the technology industry right now. Its potential impact is massive, and along with that comes a variety of cybersecurity threats and challenges that we're going to address tonight. So I'm personally super excited to learn about that. Tonight I don't really have to tell you too much about Acronis as I did at our event in June, because our first speaker is going to be tasked with that. So I'd like to welcome to the stage the Acronis Chief Marketing Officer, John Zanis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Wow, that was a great intro. Here's the clicker. So my name is John Zani. I run the marketing organization for Acronis. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes to give a little context of why we invited you all here. Some of you I know were at our event last October. How many were at the October event? Okay, good. Well, welcome back. For those of you who might not know who we are, we're a company that specializes in data protection and specifically backup as a part of that. We have over 5 million consumers using our product today, 500,000 businesses, over 5,000 petabytes of data that is being backed up and protected today. And up there, what you see is a list of the number of awards that we've been awarded over the last year or so on our portfolio of products. You might wonder why we're associated with Formula One and why we decided to sponsor them. There's a whole story I can tell you after about it, but mostly it's because Formula One is the #1 race sport in the industry. We're the #1 product. It's the fastest race sport in the industry. We have the fastest product, and it is the most innovative sport in the industry, and we are all about innovation. Plus, Toro Rosso has a beautiful blue car, like our own colors, which was sort of important to us. So, why are we here? I talk a lot about data and how we think about data in our lives. And you might not realize it, but data has become part of who you are. Your digital persona, your digital content is really now core to who you are. Whether you're a business or an individual, if you eliminate that component or that component disappears or gets damaged, it actually has a significant impact on your life. Protecting that data, making sure that it stays, you manage that integrity, is actually getting more complex. The day when everything was on one PC and you knew it was there and you had control over it is gone, right? You're getting more and more devices every day, mobile devices, PCs, laptops, servers, other endpoint devices, the cloud. Your digital persona is spread over a very, very wide variety of devices. Unfortunately, that means we're inviting more and more attacks, more ways for nefarious people to come and find ways to disrupt your life. You're also seeing that you want to share more of this data, which is why it's spread out all over the place now, is because we're a social society. We like socializing, we like sharing, which means you want to be able to do this in a way that you know you still have control over your data. And because of all of this, it's becoming more and more complex for you to be able to make sure that the data you own, the part of you that you are, that it is secure, that it hasn't been tampered with, that it hasn't been destroyed. When it's all on one PC, fairly easy. You just check the PC. Now when it's across multiple mobile phones, a few tablets, PCs, 6 different social networks, and a couple of public clouds, it's actually harder to keep track of your life, which means you need a different way to think about protecting this. And that's what Acronis True Image 2017 New Generation is all about, and the product that we're announcing and launching today. And what's really cool about this is the technology you're going to hear about today is only in our consumer product. It will be coming into our business products here shortly, but we actually shipped it first in True Image. So this is, you are the first to see this. What did we do? Well, first, backup is useless if it isn't fast, right? So we just made sure we're faster than anybody out there, both in terms of backing up and recovery. But the other part is now we have Acronis Active Protection, which you will hear about, that protects you against cyber attack. This means that if we detect that something's happening to your machine, like ransomware, which you'll hear about, where your files are getting encrypted, we'll immediately create a backup, stop the ransomware, and recover, right? So that way, you can feel safe that your data is secure. Complete, we talked about the number of devices. We're constantly adding backup capabilities to more and more devices. So as you think of more endpoints where you want to put your data, we'll make sure they're protected. And the last one is about security. And there's 3 components here. First, it's been around for a while, but people seem to ignore this, is what we call dual protection. You should always have 2 copies of your backup, one local and one off-premise. Off-premise today is easy. It's called the cloud, right? You don't have to call a friend and say, hey, could you hold this copy of the hard drive for me? Yet a lot of people don't do that. The second one is what we call Acronis Notary. You'll be hearing about blockchain, which is called a distributed ledger, which allows us to essentially mark files and pictures and other content such that if they get tampered with or touched, you will know that someone else touched them. Because today, think about it. If you put a backup in the cloud and you recover, nothing tells you whether that document has been changed or not, or that photo has been changed or not. You might have even changed it. Or if you post a photo on Facebook and then bring it back, nothing tells you whether someone messed with a few bits. This is technology that allows you to know whether it's been changed or not. And then Acronis A-Sign is built on top of Notary to allow you to actually sign documents and confirm that they were actually untouched after they were signed. So you'll be hearing more about why we believe this is important from speakers and also how we've implemented it in our product. So I told you I'd be short. My point here is that in this new world, you really need to make sure that you're protecting your backups from attacks like ransomware, that it can support the complexity of a world of multiple devices, that you can sign documents. And any solution out there that doesn't do this is just not good enough. So with that, I am going to give it back to our MC, there he is, who's going to bring in our first keynote speaker who will be much more interesting than I am. And thank you for that. Okay.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's exciting stuff. I mean, data is important and it's critical. We back it up and we keep it safe, and nobody is doing it better than Acronis. As promised, the 2 speakers, the 2 keynote speakers we have tonight are internationally, nationally, internationally known speakers on the topics we're gonna talk about tonight. They travel the country and in some cases the globe, talking about blockchain and cybersecurity. So we're truly really thrilled to be able to bring them here to you. The first speaker, Alex Tapscott, is a passionate advocate for the disruptive potential of new technology. He's also the co-author of a book called The Blockchain Revolution: how the technology behind Bitcoin is changing money, business, and the world. So without further ado, Alex Tapscott.
Well, thank you very much for that warm introduction. I'm delighted to be here with all of you today. This is a very exciting time to be someone who's passionate about new digital technology, because it appears that the technology that's actually likely to have the greatest impact on the world of business, on the enterprise, and on everyone's daily lives has actually arrived. But it's not autonomous vehicles, the Internet of Things, the social web, or deep learning. It's actually the technology behind cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, and it's called the blockchain. So before I go on, I just want to get a show of hands here. Prior to tonight, who's actually heard of this thing called blockchain? And who would say that they understand it really well? Okay. So it's my hope tonight that you'll leave here today reflecting back on this talk in the same way that you might reflect back on a talk that you heard 20 years or 22 years ago, if you're old enough, I see some of you maybe aren't, about the first generation of the internet. Because this technology represents nothing short of the second generation of the internet. So when we use the internet today to send and move and share information, we're not actually sending or moving an original, we're sending a copy. And generally speaking, that's okay. In fact, it's one of the big advantages of the internet. It's like having a printing press for information. So if you host a website, anybody can access it. If you send an email to one person, you can send the same email to everybody else. And that's a really powerful tool. Except when it comes to things that have value, like say money, being able to send a copy is actually a really bad idea. If I have to pay you, ma'am, $20 for something, if I send it to you, it's really important that you know that you have it, and I don't still have the same $20. Like I could have the same, say, PDF file, and I can't send the same $20 to every single person in this room. Because if I could, that $20 would be worthless. So it's great to have a printing press for information, but it's not so great to have a printing press for money or for assets. And this is a very specific computer science problem that has been difficult to overcome. It's called the double spend problem, or the double payment problem. How do you make sure that when you move something digitally that has value, that you aren't leaving behind a trail of breadcrumbs, so to speak? And it's one that we haven't really been able to solve. So as a result, through the first generation of the internet, we've had to rely on intermediaries, middlemen, who sit in the middle of transactions and perform a bunch of important roles. They establish the identity of parties in a transaction. They create trust between those parties. And then they perform all the so-called business logic that goes into commerce, the clearing and the settling and the record keeping of transactions. Generally speaking, these intermediaries, banks, governments, big social media companies, they do a pretty good job. But they have some very specific limitations. The first is that they're all centralized. And anything that is centralized is vulnerable to hacking or to attack. And this happens with alarming regularity in the private sector and government and elsewhere. You know, Home Depot, Target, Yahoo, the State Department, the NSA. The NSA has trouble securing its systems. What hope do many other people have? The second thing is that they add costs and they slow things down. Let's take one example, say the market for cross-border payments. We use what's called the correspondent banking system. To send a remittance payment, someone living in New York wants to send money to their family abroad, costs on average about 10%. And it takes 3 to 4 days for that to settle, which is odd. When was the last time anybody here sent a cross-border email? Doesn't exist. But when it comes to this other kind of information that has value, it takes a really long time and it adds tons and tons of cost. The third big issue is that they exclude big parts of the population. There are 2.5 billion people in the world who don't have access to financial services. Another 2.5 billion people don't have a formal identity issued by government that allows them to access basic services, and that's problematic as well. And then the fourth big issue is that they capture data. Every time you want to interact with a bank or a government or a company, you're leaving behind a fragment of your identity with them. And that's problematic too, because that information can get hacked, but it could also be used to undermine your privacy. So you can argue in sum that intermediaries still capture what I'd say an asymmetric benefit, a little bit more than they should, from the first generation of the digital age, maybe even more than the pre-digital age. So what if there was a vast new global platform based on what's called a distributed ledger, as John said, that doesn't run on one single computer like inside of a bank, but runs on many computers, perhaps even all computers. And it's not accessible to a few, but it's accessible to many or to all. Where not just information, like documents, like websites, like voice over IP, but things that have actual value. Money, stocks and bonds and other financial assets, titles and deeds, content with specific licensing, IP, even votes in an election, even your identity can be moved and stored and managed securely and privately, and where trust is not established by an intermediary, but through mass collaboration, consensus, and clever code. So all this stuff started back in 2008, right around the time that the financial industry was basically on the brink of collapse. An anonymous person or group of persons called Satoshi Nakamoto outlined this thing called Bitcoin. So who's heard of Bitcoin? Yeah, a lot of hands on that one. So Bitcoin was designed to solve a very simple problem, which is that it was to enable people to make a peer-to-peer payment online. In the same way that if I were to go down to Broadway and grab a pretzel and a Coke from the guy on the street, I handed him $5, he's not going to ask me for my driver's license, and I'm not going to need to use the Visa network. I have cash, it's a bearer instrument, it passes from me to him, and once I've done that, that transaction is complete. That didn't exist for the internet. So these programmers got together and tried to develop something that would resemble cash. And what was interesting about Bitcoin is it worked. And it worked so well that it set off a spark which has caught on like wildfire and captured the imagination of people and business leaders in a wide variety of areas. So how does all this stuff work? As I said, it starts with a distributed ledger, basically a record of every transaction, every movement of information that has value, and everything that's currently happening at that moment in time. Transactions on this network are constantly happening. And every so often, kind of like the heartbeat of that network, they are bundled into this thing called a block. That block could be, by the way, I sent you a Bitcoin, it could be I voted in an election, it could be I sold a share of a company, et cetera. Anything that requires the movement of value captured into this thing called a block. That block is then broadcast to a network. There are participants on that network who commit large computing resources to work together to reach consensus on basically what is true. That when I sent you that $20, I couldn't send the same 20 to somebody else. And for doing so, they're rewarded. Once that happens, that block is basically sealed in time. It's time-stamped, and it's added to a series of blocks that goes back all the way to the beginning of time, hence why it's called a blockchain. And this is one of the critical insights, which is that the information called a hash in each block must reference the information in the preceding block, which must reference the information in the preceding block in order to be valid. Now what that means in practice is if you wanted to hack this kind of a system, it wouldn't be as easy as getting across a firewall and moving some numbers in a spreadsheet. You'd actually have to rewrite the entire history of commerce on that blockchain, do it in broad daylight in front of one of the biggest computing resources in the world, and only a few minutes' time. So, is it unhackable? No. If I say it's unhackable tonight, it will get hacked tomorrow morning. But it's as close as we've got to nearly unhackable. And it will become the basis for a lot of aspects of our daily lives, whether or not we know it or not. So that's kind of Bitcoin, and I think Bitcoin really is the start of the story, and it's the architecture on top of which all this innovation is happening. Who here has heard of Ethereum? All right. So Ethereum was developed by a 19-year-old college dropout from Toronto, Canada, which is where I'm from, who was big in the Bitcoin community, but saw in Bitcoin certain limitations. He liked the idea of using a distributed network, a trustless network, to move value, but he also thought that maybe it could do more. Maybe you could write programming language on top of this kind of a distributed network. Maybe you could do contracting on top of this network. And one of the key insights of this platform is they developed this thing called a smart contract. And basically it is what it sounds like. It is programming language that replicates or mimics the logic of a contract, but with guaranteed execution, enforcement, and payments, where you don't have to rely on lawyers, banks, escrow agents, courts, and all the normal intermediaries that we have to rely on to enforce agreements between parties. So think about business, any kind of business. We're on Wall Street, so why not financial services? Every financial asset, stock, bond, the dividends, the coupons you receive off of a fixed income instrument, is basically a contractual agreement. So if all contracts can be replaced with this kind of a platform, it can rapidly reduce the friction, improve the speed and the cost and the security of basically every kind of business. Another one is Hyperledger, which was pioneered by the Linux Foundation. They know a thing or two about scaling big open source projects. Hyperledger is designed for business, and what differentiates Hyperledger is that it doesn't have what's called a native token. So Bitcoin's got bitcoins, they're an asset, they go up and down. Ethereum has a thing called Ether. Hyperledger doesn't have that, but it uses the same properties of a network to move and store and validate transactions. So in the book, Blockchain Revolution, we tried to understand what this could mean for the world. And one of the areas that I think it could have the biggest impact is in solving what we call the prosperity paradox. This strange set of conditions where wealth is being created, but prosperity is stalling, where the rising tide of technology is not lifting all boats in the same way that it may have in the past, and that the internet may have actually created some problems rather than solving the ones that people thought it could. So there are a few ways of going into this. I won't cover them all, but one thing might be, say, I don't know, let's choose one. Protecting rights through immutable records. So people may have heard of this thing called financial inclusion, this idea that people don't have access to banking. It's actually not the biggest reason why people are kept out of the global economy. The biggest reason is property rights. If you don't have a secure right to the land or the assets that you own, then it's hard to build wealth. So it turns out that 70% of people in the developing world have a flaky or unenforceable title to their land, which means that there may be a duplicate copy at a local records office that claims that somebody else owns it. It may be that there's a local corrupt official who won't enforce it because he's been bribed. There could be a conspiracy at the highest levels of government to disenfranchise you. This actually happened, and it happens regularly in many parts of the developing world. So if you could store ownership of assets like your home on a distributed ledger where everyone could agree on who owned what, it'd be very difficult for any one single bad actor, like a local official or a corrupt government agent, to singularly or unilaterally alter that. And all of a sudden, the thing that is a roof over your head could also be a source of income and a way for you to access a loan to pay for, say, education or to start a business. And this could be one of the foundational aspects of upward mobility in the developing world. My focus today, however, is mostly on what this means for business and therefore for consumers who will ultimately consume new products and services that will be created by this technology. So this is a world-renowned Nobel-winning economist. His name is Ronald Coase. And Mr. Coase became famous for asking a deceptively simple question. He asked, why do we have companies? If the best way to allocate resources in an economy is using a market, Adam Smith said that, and a lot of economists would agree, how come everyone inside of a firm is not an independent contractor? How come sales and marketing and manufacturing and logistics and HR and risk and management aren't all bidding with each other in an open market to find out who does it best and to find the best price? And he pointed to one thing. He said transaction costs. So long as it's cheaper to do something inside the boundaries of a firm than outside, companies will continue to grow. So in the early days of capitalism, the big industrialists kind of understood this, which is why the Ford Motor Company didn't just make cars. They also had a timber plantation, a steel mill, a rubber plantation in Brazil. The Ford plant in Dearborn, Michigan used to take in raw materials like wood and beams of steel, and at the other end would come a Model T Ford. Because Henry Ford understood it was cheaper to keep things inside of the boundaries of the firm than it was to contract in an open market. And that's the way the industrial corporation basically looked. The first generation of the internet helped to unbundle the firm a little bit. So the mantra in the 90s was focus on what you do best and outsource the rest. And so we got offshoring and outsourcing and eventually business webs, where companies realized it was cheaper and actually more productive to partner with other companies who brought extra value to the table than to try and do everything inside your four walls. Except if you look at the company today, and I mean any company, does it really look that much different than it did 25 or 30 years ago? Certain aspects have certainly changed. Supply chains have become more complex. Businesses are more global. But the architecture of the firm, I think, kind of looks pretty similar to what it used to look like. And that's because while the internet helped to drop the cost of things like search and the cost of communication, so you could have a Skype call with someone in Australia, it didn't actually drop the cost of what really binds businesses together. The cost of contracting, the cost of negotiating and enforcing contracts, and the cost of establishing trust. Those costs actually did not really decline that much. We think with blockchain they will, and as a result will bring about a whole set of new and exciting business models. So we all know about Uber, one of the so-called sharing economy companies. It's a nice notion, this idea that we all get together and we share to create value, but it's a bit of a misnomer. I actually think that Uber, and it's a great company, and I took an Uber down here, so this is not a knock against them, but they're not successful because they share. They're actually successful because they don't share. They aggregate excess capacity and sell it through a centralized intermediary called Uber. And they actually strive to become a monopoly in the good sense, the Peter Thiel 0 to 1 sense, the Google sense. But the idea has got nothing to do with sharing. It actually has everything to do with aggregation. So we think that sharing economy models can be reimagined with blockchain technology. Think about, I need to change the advertising pitch for Subaru, because she does not look that relaxed in that picture. It's a cool car, though. I'd like to drive that one. So what does Uber really do? Well, I think the first thing and the most important thing is that it does identity and reputation. So you log on to Uber. Who here, has anyone not used Uber? All right. So this will be repetitive for some of you, but identity, you look into an Uber and you see the name of the driver, the kind of car he's driving, where he is. He sees similar information about you. You're at your location. He knows your name, et cetera. The second thing is reputation. 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5 star rating for him and for you dictates whether or not you match up. If your rating is poor, then you might not get a ride, and he might not be able to pick you up. The third thing is contracting. Uber is actually enforcing a contract on your behalf. If the driver comes and picks you up and takes you to where you want to go, then you pay. If he gets a flat tire, if he turns off his Uber, if he decides he wants to do something else, you're not going to pay. If he gets in an accident, you're not going to pay. That actually happened to me in Miami. I got in an accident in Uber. It's fascinating. So it's good that it was fascinating and not terrifying, I guess. You thought that was funny. So there's a contract that's being enforced by the corporation. And the fourth thing is payments. Built into the back end are things like your Visa, MasterCard, direct debit, whatever, that allows you to pay very easily. All four of those things could be simplified and could actually maybe be improved upon using blockchain technology. So something like identity. If your identity isn't just your Uber, but it's actually something that your Uber identity, but it's something that you own and control, and it's made up of different aspects of your life, you actually have a much more rich, more realistic picture of who you are. Something like reputation. If you act with integrity, then you'll have a better reputation than if you don't act with integrity. And it's not an intermediary that's dictating that. It's something that exists for you alone to use. The third thing, contracting. If you use a smart contract to self-automate the transaction between the Uber driver and the passenger, you actually don't need this intermediary doing the contracting. And then blockchain platforms like, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum have native payment applications that would make the payment process frictionless and peer-to-peer. So rather than needing Uber to work with these payment providers who take 3 to 4 days to clear and settle a transaction, the payment could happen bilaterally, peer-to-peer, and happen instantly. So all of a sudden, you can imagine Uber without Uber. Something like another area that's not obvious for people when they think about this technology is in the world of arts and music and creative industries generally. So this is the way the music industry has looked for a long time. The 50s and 60s was the rise of the modern music industry. Big labels were in charge, and it wasn't exactly lucrative for most artists. You would sign a contract and you receive a royalty agreement that will enable you to get 4 or 5%. But it was enough to earn a decent living. along came the internet. The internet was actually supposed to solve this problem because you didn't need this physical medium like a CD or an LP. You could actually sell it online, and would enable artists to connect directly with consumers, except it didn't do that. Because it took a thing that was an asset that had value and turned it into a free commodity that was pumped through the printing press of the internet to the point where its marginal value went to basically zero. So a whole bunch of new intermediaries like Spotify and Apple Music have come about to try and solve this problem, and they have, in a sense that record labels are making money again, and Spotify and Apple are making money again, except artists are making less than they ever have before. In the 1980s, if you were the songwriter on a hit single and it sold 1 million records, you could expect to make around $45,000. Today, that same song streams on Spotify. You don't make $45,000. You don't make $30,000. You make $36 for 1 million streams, which is roughly the cost of my taxi ride to this venue. So you went from a year's living wage to a taxi ride. So this is a system that's broken. How does blockchain solve it? This is Imogen Heap. She's a Grammy Award-winning, platinum-selling singer-songwriter, and she's working with a couple of blockchain startups to try and improve this. And she basically made the epiphany that songs are already digital. They already contain music and lyrics and artwork and all this other stuff. Why couldn't they also contain business logic? Why couldn't they also have a smart contract where in that song there was a whole bunch of language that said how the song paid out depending on how it was consumed. So if it was streamed, it was 0.5 cent. If it was played on the radio, it was 1 cent. If it was used in an advertisement, it was $10 per view or some other licensing agreement. If it was sampled for some other piece of music, if it was covered by a cover band, there would be all these different licensing arrangements built into the song itself. And then the royalty splits would be on the other side. So the songwriter gets 5%, the lead singer gets 10%, the producer gets 10%, the other artists get 5%, however you want to split it. So that every time the song is consumed through either an existing platform or through one of these new blockchain business models, the payment happens and self-execute automatically. So rather than artists getting paid last, right now there are 10 intermediaries who have to get paid before the artist gets their check, and getting paid way down the road, it usually takes 2 to 4 quarters to receive a royalty check, that get paid first and they get paid fairly. And that's something that could apply to journalism. You write an article, someone goes and checks it out, they pay a microcent, they don't even know that they're making that payment, but that payment goes right to the person who's writing the article. The same could apply for film, basically any other industry. So there's a prevailing belief that this technology is a disintermediator, that it will cut middlemen out of the equation. And that's true in some respects. If you sit in the middle of a transaction and process a payment because it's what you've always done and you defended that position as best you could, you're probably in for a rude awakening. But there are at least as many opportunities for re-intermediation as there are for disintermediation, to put yourself back in the middle to add value. So I talked a bit about the remittance market. $600 billion a year goes from countries like the United States and Canada and the UK and elsewhere to the developing world. It's the biggest flow of funds into the developing world. It's bigger than foreign aid, and it's bigger than direct foreign investment. The average fees, according to the World Bank, are 10%. So that's $60 billion that's not going into the hands of people who need that money. The same report said that that money is primarily spent for food, education, shelter, transportation, basic human needs. So along come companies like Abra and others like it. And Abra just had a very exciting announcement yesterday where they enable people to send money from places like the US to anywhere in the world for a fraction of the cost. And they don't have to use Bitcoin or Ether or something weird and foreign. What they see on their app is whatever their local currency is. It could be US dollars, it could be British pounds, it could be Canadian dollars. And they press a button. What happens is the payment moves across the Bitcoin network and then lands on the receiver's end in their local currency. So it could be Filipino pesos, or it could be renminbi, or it could be anything like that. The transaction doesn't cost 10%. It costs anywhere between sort of 25 and 50 basis points, a quarter and a half of 1%. But the interesting innovation with these guys is that, at least for now, people who are in the Philippines can't go to the market with money on an Abra account and pay for a newspaper or groceries. It's a cash-based economy. So they've developed a network of tellers where you can decide, like as an Uber driver, that you want to be a teller. and mostly it's kids riding around on motorbikes in places like Manila, who will agree to exchange virtual pesos for physical pesos, and they will set the price, and it usually ends up being about 1.5%. And it's got the same similar star rating as companies like Uber have. So all of a sudden, you can get physical cash in your local currency in a matter of minutes at 1.5% versus paying 10% in waiting days. That is a 10-to-1 improvement and the kind of thing that is going to change consumers' lives. There's $300 to $600 billion a year of supply chain fraud in the world. And there's some really bizarre statistics to go along with it. Like 15% of all medical devices sold in the United States that are made in China are counterfeit. Who knew? So something to think about when you put that thermometer in your mouth. This is something that affects consumers. It's something that affects manufacturers. It's something that affects governments who have to manage the flow of goods through these complex supply chains and tax them at borders. And it's an area that could be potentially very interesting. If you think about it, if you can put assets onto a network and track them at any point in time through the supply chain, you can know if that has been hacked in any way. Almost, and actually quite similarly, in the same way that Acronis' notary service basically enables you to know whether or not the information that was on your computer has been hacked. So it could be a diamond that comes from a place like Africa or a place like Canada. And you can know its point of origin and where it goes in the process. And a company called Everledger is doing something very similar with this. So they've now registered 5 million diamonds, and they're partnered with IBM and some other companies to manage assets through a supply chain. It's a very fascinating way that they do it, and in many ways it's an IoT, Internet of Things implementation. So each diamond is unique. It has a certain cut, clarity, carat, et cetera, but it also has flaws, and some of them are microscopic. So if you can do a 5-factor authentication on the cut, clarity, size, et cetera, plus all of the different flaws and where they're located, you can know whether or not the physical diamond that you're receiving on the end is the same as the digital diamond, because the digital hash, the representation, cannot represent anything but that single diamond. So I think it's very likely that many types of assets, both raw goods and finished products, will be tracked and moved in a way that allows people to trust and know that what they're getting is true. And in order for that to happen, you need blockchain. On the Internet of Things, there's an estimate. There are a lot of estimates. Every year they go up and up. But within 5 to 10 years, there'll be hundreds of billions of Internet-enabled devices, trillions of Internet-enabled devices, doing everything from monitoring our health, to driving us around, to generating our electricity, to managing our affairs. And that's an exciting idea, but it's also kind of terrifying in a sense, because these devices, in order for this internet to be secure and for it to work well, are going to need a native digital medium to move, store, and manage value and data that has value, like your identity and your personal information, securely and privately. So something like the energy market is a good example. So today, the way the energy market works is we've got big industrial power plants which generate electricity and sell it, usually through a regulated utility, to a willing marketplace, like Con Ed in New York, for example. Except there are some problems with that. One is that consumers don't have a lot of choice. Two is that they're actually kind of inefficient, because what happens with power plant, they were built to be efficient because of economies of scale, but over time they become less efficient because the energy has to travel across long distances, and the more it travels, the more is lost. And that's just basic physics. And then the final thing is that they're vulnerable. Remember Hurricane Sandy, when the plant exploded and all of a sudden half of the city was without energy? So can we take this idea of distributed technology and apply it to the energy grid? Just across the East River is a really exciting project that's it's a company called LO3, and they're partnered with a company called Consensus Systems that are pioneering what's called a distributed or peer-to-peer power grid, where people have solar panels on top of their brownstones in their apartments and things like that, and they're generating electricity. Those electrons are then basically turned into a digital asset where they're given value. And then someone across the street or next door can actually buy that power directly from their neighbor. So instead of selling it back into the grid at a wholesale rate, they'll get a market rate, so that's empowering. It'll be a source of income for them. It's more energy efficient because the energy has to travel 10 feet instead of 1,000 miles, but it's also more secure by not having any one single point of failure. That kind of a network would allow neighborhoods and businesses to remain powered in times of emergency or in times of crisis. So, who knows what that is? What, you know? It's a Rube Goldberg machine. Yeah. So, a Rube Goldberg machine is like a really complicated apparatus that performs a whole bunch of really complex and unnecessary steps, and in the end it solves a very simple task, like it cracks an egg or it closes a door. This is basically the way the financial services industry works. No, I'm serious. Like, you know, if you go down to a coffee shop and you tap your card on the card reader, do they have tap cards? They do, right? In the States? You guys are always behind on that stuff. So you tap your card on the card reader and you think that it's creating this digital transaction where the money is going to the merchant and it's all good, but it's not. It's actually going through a series of different intermediaries, the merchant's acquiring bank, your issuing bank, payment processor, risk management company, settlement networks, et cetera. And it doesn't happen instantly. It takes 2 to 3 days, and it usually costs the merchant a couple %. And in some cases, it can cost them more, which is why, to this day, there's still merchants that will say no credit card accepted because they don't want to pay the interchange fee. I mean, like, what? Like, this is ridiculous. The same is true of in the stock markets. You know, we know about high-frequency traders. These guys put their trading desks next to the server farm in New Jersey rather than being down here or in Midtown where all the nice restaurants are, because the time it takes for the electrons to move from their desk to the server in Jersey is 1/1 trillionth of a second faster than if they were 8 miles away. So that's cool. You think, wow, that's fast, speed, we're moving quickly. Except their trades take the same time to clear and settle as if it were a mom and pop investor in like Boise. You know, it's still T+2 or T+3. So there's digital wallpaper, but beneath the surface there's a lot of mechanics that need improving. And this is true basically of every single part of the industry. You know, it's a complex business, but really it does a bunch of really simple stuff. It gives way for people and businesses to move money, to store money, to access credit, to buy and sell financial assets, to access capital, to start or grow a business, to, you know, insure against catastrophic risk, to account for what's happening in an organization, et cetera. And each of these different areas of the industry will be transformed. I wish I could get into it. But you have to kind of think yourself, if I were starting a bank today, would I build it on the same technology stack, with the same infrastructure, and the same business model as a bank has in the past, or would I do something different? And the final thing is on data. That's the virtual me. I have a big head, but I don't think it's that big relative to my body. So there's a funny thing that's happened during the first generation of the internet, which is the creation of this whole new asset class called data. And data is as important to this economy as something like, say, industrial plant and equipment was during the industrial age, or land was during the agrarian age. I mean, it's the foundation of trillions of dollars of market cap value, Google, Facebook, et cetera. But the funny thing about this asset class is that we create it, but we don't own it. It's owned by your bank, it's owned by your government, it's owned by your social media company, et cetera. And that's problematic for a couple of reasons. It means we can't use that data to manage our affairs, but it could also be vulnerable to hacking or to attack. And it turns out there's a virtual you out there, just like there's a virtual me. Except the virtual you knows you better than you know you. You might not know what exactly you said, where exactly you went, what exactly you purchased, at what time of day, exactly 1 year ago today, but the virtual you does. So what if we could take the virtual you back? What if your identity was something that you alone controlled, and there were different parts of it? There was you, the user of social media. There was you, the customer of the bank. There was you, the citizen of the United States. There was you, the resident of New York City. There was you, et cetera. And you only divulge the information that's absolutely necessary to get what you need out of an interaction. So if you want to buy something online, it's not actually necessary, most of the time, that the merchant knows who you are. In the same way that if I went and bought a pretzel, the guy doesn't ask me for my driver's license. He just wants the $5. But if you want to, say, open a bank account, get access to insurance, vote in an election, they do need to know more about you. The difference is that you are the one who provides informed consent on how that data is used. And I think that's the direction that we're going. And that's beneficial. It's beneficial for individuals, but it could also be beneficial for businesses too, because there's more data that you can have in your independent identity than what they would have in their small fraction of your identity. It just means that they'll have to interact with you peer-to-peer to get access to it. And I think that's a good thing as well. So that's 7 business models, which is one chapter of a 12-chapter book called Blockchain Revolution. And it's an area that I think is going to be really exciting. So I'm bullish, I think you can tell. But there are lots of reasons why this technology may not reach its potential, why it may get sidelined or sidetracked. And they're varied. I mean, there are questions like, how will governments react? How will regulators respond? What kind of rules will they put in place for this? How will leaders of the old paradigm, incumbent companies, respond to this? Will they try and put up roadblocks? Will they try and take it and use it for themselves? Will criminals use it? And we're going to hear a little bit about ransomware, which is enabled largely by cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. But for each of these challenges, you have to ask yourself, are they a reason that blockchain's a bad idea, or are they an implementation challenge to be overcome? And I think in basically every single way, these are an implementation challenge. And many of these 10 things, which is a list that we compiled for the book, which is less than a year old, are already in the process of being solved. Is the technology ready for prime time? Well, we've already seen commercial implementations in lots of different industries, including in data storage. Will governments try and stifle it or twist it? Well, we've actually seen some really enlightened central banks and regulators respond to this quite positively. Will criminals use it? Maybe, but ISIS uses Twitter. The question is how we respond to that, and now we've got solutions to address it. So going forward, the future could be bright or the future could not be bright. But it appears that once again, the technology genie has been unleashed from the bottle. Summoned by an unknown person or persons at an uncertain time in history, this genie is once again at our disposal to transform the economic power grid and the old order of human affairs for the better, but only if we will it. So I ask you all to please join the revolution. Thank you very much.
Fascinating. Disruptive. Very, very disruptive. I think the only thing I would take issue with is you must not be from this city, because that $5 will get you the Pepsi or the pretzel, but not both. We have one more keynote speaker and then a presentation from someone from Acronis. But before we get there, I know you guys are standing. This is actually theater seating. Does anybody want to come over and take a seat, or you guys want to stay where you are? You're good where you are. I think that means they're good where they are. Okay. I just wanted to offer that up. There's a monitor right there, so you can still see the presentation. Our next speaker, our second and final keynote, is an accomplished public speaker and security expert who lectures internationally about espionage, cybersecurity, fraud, hacking, and corporate diligence. But if you saw the movie a few years ago called Breach, about the capture of the worst spy in U.S. history, then you're already a little familiar with him, because he's the guy who caught him. Eric O'Neill.
So Alex mentioned the importance of verifying the data, and John earlier mentioned the importance of having a backup that's somewhere other than sitting there on your laptop. And that made me think of a friend of mine. He used to take his a backup drive. He'd take all of his data and put it on a backup drive and bring it to my house. And he would go over to my bookcase in my office, and he'd put it right there between 2 books. He's a robotics expert. He's a computer programmer, and he designs robots for NASA, right? So important stuff. He doesn't want to lose any of the intellectual property behind his patents. And so that was his backup, or at least one of his backups. And his data integrity was, he would come and he would say, "Did your kids touch my drive?" And I'd say, no, they can't reach up that high. And then he would go back to New Zealand, where he lives. So that's really setting your backup somewhere else. But I'm here to talk about ransomware, right? And I want to start with Amy. Amy is a nurse. She works at the Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital out in California, and she's seen it all. She's literally seen it all. She's one of those embattled nurses who will work extra shifts, loves her patients, spends the extra time with them, knows more than all the junior doctors, helps them out when they get something wrong. And this is an acute care center, so this is an important place. There's about 434 beds, and it's filled with patients. And like I said, she's seen it all until one morning when she goes to log on to her desktop, and she's trying to input the patient information that is so necessary so it can get out to the doctors quickly. Things like blood test results, x-rays, right? All of the stats and vitals that she's taking time and again. I mean, she can only write so much of it on her arm to remember until she's got to get it in the computer. She sits down in front of the computer and she finally sees something she's never seen before. It's an odd screen, it's red, and it's got some bizarre logo, and it says, your information has been encrypted. And then down at the bottom, there's a timer, and it says, all your information will be deleted within 6 days. So she raises the alarm, and she starts asking other people. She goes, maybe I'll use somebody else's computer, but they're all locked. Now, this happened. This happened very early in February of last year, and it was one of the first times that we all had to think about ransomware. In fact, that was when the news and the media were all saying, what is ransomware? And, experts are standing up there and saying, ransomware is this and that. But we all had to realize that this could happen. Now, Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital spent almost 2 weeks with these poor nurses and doctors using pen and paper, writing all over their arms, right, in order to get everything done. That is harmful to patients. A lot of the patients had to be moved. The FBI was involved, and the FBI couldn't decrypt the information that was locked on all of their computer systems. And finally said, back then, in February, just pay it. They ended up paying about $17,000 worth of Bitcoin, got their information unlocked, and went back to business. And it's not just Hollywood Presbyterian. MedStar Health, if you might remember, in DC, where I'm from, and Baltimore, they have 10 hospitals and any number of medical centers. They were also hit by a ransomware attack. As soon as they saw it happen, because this was a number of months ago, a few months ago, it wasn't as early, they shut down their entire network. They all went to pen and paper until they could figure out what had happened and stop it from spreading. So while the ransomware attack itself didn't spread throughout the entire network, they shut it down, and that harmed them. They're just two examples, and I could go on and on for my entire time about the medical community, because 88% of the ransomware attacks that occurred in 2016 were against hospitals. Why? Why target the hospitals and the medical? Just because these guys are absolute jerks? Well, sure, but if you lock a hospital who has to give care immediately to people, then there's a better chance those people are going to pay the ransom and get it unlocked. So here's another vector for ransomware. How many people like horror movies, or torture porn movies, they call it, right? You remember the movie Saw? Remember those things, right? So the movie Saw, everybody is put in these horrible situations, and really nobody gets to survive, which breaks my first rule of horror movies. If they don't have a chance to survive, I don't like the movie. They can be idiots and die because they're dumb, but they have to have that chance to survive. I don't like Saw because nobody has a chance to survive. It's kind of like the Buzzsaw malware ransomware attack. Buzzsaw has that creepy clown from Saw that shows up on the screen, and instead of just saying, your information has been locked, and here's what encryption is, and this is why you will never get your information. And click here, and you'll go to a help desk, where we'll help you learn what a Bitcoin is and how to buy it, so you can pay us, and we'll unlock your information for you. It just has the creepy clown that laughs at you and a timer, and the timer moves quickly, a matter of hours. And every hour it counts down, a percentage of your information is irrevocably deleted. That puts pressure, that's stress. And you might say to yourself, I'm about to lose every single picture of all of my kids, since the day they were born, the video of my son's first steps, or the first piano recital my daughter went to, if I don't pay this. And people often do. So this stuff can be nefarious. And It is a business. So let me back up. What's ransomware? I hope everybody here has at least heard of it because it's been pervasive in the media. That's because it is the #1 cybercrime of 2016. Ransomware is, to put it in the simplest of terms, when malware, malicious software, is introduced somehow into your system, let's say your personal laptop, anything that's really an endpoint that locks the system, it encrypts the contents of your drive. And the attacker has the key. So think of it as locking all your doors, and there's no way to break through, and the attacker has the key. And if you want that key, if you want your data back, you have to pay them. And of course, you're using Bitcoin because it's a currency that you can pay them in a way where no one is going to be able to track and find them. Or at least that's the plan. And it is an incredible business. Ransomware is one of the banner businesses of 2016. Just to give you an idea, in 2015, the cost of a ransomware attack in Bitcoin was about $294. You go to log into your computer one morning, and you can't get in, and you've got that angry-looking skull on the front, or the clown, or some nice message that says, "Pay me." There are all sorts of different ones, and you pay $294. Last year, the amount was $679. And ransomware between January to September of 2016 increased 300%. It increased because it works. So we saw this massive increase in 2016, right? The FBI predictions were it is over a $1 billion crime. That's the cost of ransomware, stealing money from people in 2016. And all the predictions for every other security expert, not just me, says that it is going to go up in 2017. So let's look at the present. Let's just look at the last couple months so that we can see some of the ways ransomware is being used. Because it's not just your computer, not just locking your stuff, not just locking a business or a hospital, right? If anyone was in San Francisco in November and you tried to ride the Muni, the San Francisco Municipal Transport Agency, right? Basically their train system. You might have gone to go buy your ticket, and when you went to go pay or try to get a ticket, you just saw two words on the screen. You hacked. I mean, they couldn't even be bothered to spell it right? No, you are. It probably didn't fit. You hacked, which is actually like even more scary than you are hacked, which is almost polite, but you hacked. And you couldn't buy a ticket. And so Muni had to, they weren't going to shut down the trains. They couldn't sell tickets to people. They let people ride free for 2 days while they went through this process of restoring a backup to all their systems. Here's one I love a lot. It's called Popcorn. It's brand new. It came out in December, and you're going to see a lot of it. For those of you who don't have a lot of cash in your pocket, it puts you in this interesting, let's call it a dilemma. If you are locked by Popcorn, the message says this: if you successfully forward this to 2 of your friends and they pay the ransom, we will unlock you for free. You have to think of this as a business. And the attackers are smart. They are thinking like a business. They have customer service. You can go in an anonymous chat room with these guys when you're locked, and they'll explain how to buy a Bitcoin, because most people don't know how to buy a Bitcoin. Alex knows how to buy a Bitcoin, but most people don't know how to buy a Bitcoin, right? So they'll help you through it because they absolutely want to get paid. 40% of organizations said that they don't even have an incident response plan in place. And when we go down to the consumer level, most of us don't have that plan either. And this isn't a crime that is just an enterprise level crime, like businesses or the government or those hospitals. But it affects every consumer and every person, because malware is not discriminate in who it targets. And they're sending out these wide phishing attacks. So, quick little lesson here. Phishing versus spear phishing. Phishing can be a broad spectrum. You get an email that looks like it comes from Google, and it says, reset your Google password. And you look at the header, and it looks like it comes from Google, and the screen looks like Google, and they have the little Google logo. And so you think, uh-oh, I'll click the link, and I'll reset my password. And you go to a screen which is a website that is actually loading malware on your computer while you give them your password. Now, a couple things can happen. You could be locked by ransomware because you just went to a screen, and while you're on that website, you don't see it happening. It's installing the malware on your computer, encrypting all the contents of your drive, and stealing your information from you until you pay them. Or you could be John Podesta, and they steal your entire Gmail account and publish it online for everyone to see in hacker democracy. So we want to be very careful. That's a phishing attack. Spear phishing means I went through your Facebook site, and I learned everything I could about you. And I learned that last weekend you were hanging out with a group of your friends, and you're doing the, I don't know, gaming night, or you were watching Game of Thrones together, or whatever you do with your group of friends every single week. And so I sent you an email that spoofs the email address, and it makes it look like it came from your best buddy. And it says, hey, I took a couple of snaps on my phone when we were hanging out the other night. Check them out. Tell me what you think. And so you think, oh, it came from my friend. We were hanging out the other night. I trust it. You open what you think is a picture. It's not. You open what you think is a picture, and this sort of weird hourglass goes, and then it just doesn't happen, and you think, oh, it must have been corrupted. The only thing that's been corrupted is your system, because you may have just infected yourself with ransomware. You can also do that to steal credentials, to steal passwords. The spear phishing is the best way that I like to say spies, not hackers, are taking your information and locking you. And it's not just a crime of money. Ransomware is used all over. Ransomware is used for cyber terrorism. Now, my background in the FBI is counterintelligence and counterterrorism. So actually what I did undercover for the FBI was follow spies and terrorists all day. I also ended up doing quite a bit of cybersecurity work and now work in cybersecurity. But I like to think about the different vectors that attacks can be used. And ransomware has been used to lock energy companies using a vector called CryptoLocker. They give them cool names: Buzzsaw, Popcorn, CryptoLocker, right? There are all sorts of them. Because these are guys who are spending a lot of time thinking about it. And they want to give it a cool name because then people will say, hey, they want to hear it on CNN, right? CryptoLocker locked 3 energy companies. They were able to unlock, but it is a threat to our power grid. And then somebody out there in the Ukraine's like, yeah, I did that, right? So if it can be used in that way, if this ransomware can be used to shut down our power or our infrastructure or our critical infrastructure or our energy grid, then that creates a serious problem beyond just paying $600 to get your information unlocked, or just sending the malware to 2 of your friends and getting them locked so they pay so you get it back free. I like to say that it's become, well, an epidemic, but it's sort of gone beyond that, right? Because 2016 has shown that it's more than that. It's a pandemic, and it is going to get worse in 2017. Here's a little bit of Acronis. Thank you for having us, Acronis. But they did a ransomware survey. And it turns out that this was from December 2017. 55% of the people who responded to their survey don't even know what ransomware is. If you don't know what it is, how can you protect yourself? And even if you know what it is and you don't take steps to protect yourself, you're going to get locked. Because these attackers are spies. They're not hackers. They're using traditional espionage methods to come after you. It's not like the movie version of The Hacker. Some guy sitting in a basement, hammering away at a keyboard, pounding energy drinks, bad junk food, yelling at his mom to leave him alone. And then finally, he hits one key, and what does he say in every stinking movie? I'm in. Into what? I mean, Harry Potter might have just walked along and waved his wand and said, I'm in too, because that's magic. That's not the way it happens. Spies are learning about who you are. They're learning and designing attacks, usually using social engineering and mining your social media in order to learn about you, to craft something that's gonna get you to click. So this stuff will come at you, whether it's targeted to you or it's sort of this broad thing that comes at you because you have an Amazon account or a PayPal account or you've used FedEx and the email scares you and makes you think, I better change my password quickly. Or I'm getting a package from grandma. I'm going to go type in the tracking number and see what's coming. That's a big vector. I did a keynote for FedEx, and I said, I'm sorry, but you guys are one of the biggest reasons that people get ransomware. And it's changing. Every single year, every single month of the last year, the malware is changing because bad guys stay one step ahead of security. It's the conundrum of security. It's the essence of criminology, getting ahead of the bad guy, disrupting the bad guys, and figuring out what they're going to do before they do it. The problem in cybersecurity is the enemy is innovating so quickly. By the time we cleaned up their mess, by the time the FBI even releases indicators of compromise, those things that help you learn and discover what the attacks are and protect against them, it's usually months down the road. And the bad guys have moved on to the next thing. That's cybersecurity. Let me give it to you in physical security a little bit, because sometimes it's easier to explain cyber with physical. Remember back in the day, terrorists used to load trucks with explosives. Some of you will remember this, and used to drive them into buildings all over the world. Our embassies were attacked. They even loaded boats with explosives and drove them into ships. And they used to do them in government buildings, domestic and foreign terrorists, all over. So what do? If you go to any government building, go ahead, walk around here. Go walk across the street and take a look. You will see these big walls. Now, they're clever. They might be these planners with big iron cores in the center. They might actually be just the ugly plain jersey walls. They might just be these big steel posts. But what they've done is they've set them up at what's called an offset. When the truck hits and explodes, it's enough distance so the blast radius isn't going to really damage the building or anyone in it. They solved the problem. They stopped them from doing it. My favorite, by the way, is FBI headquarters. If you ever go to DC, go look at FBI headquarters. You can see where they started with these big, nice planters, and they actually planted plants in a lot of them. But like our government, they started around one side, and then after getting about half a block, they just filled them all with gravel because they either ran out of time, patience, or money. And it's just really ugly. But the FBI headquarters building is ugly anyway. By the way, I'm from DC, and one thing I was thinking of, I was like, how do I describe ransomware? And I was thinking, it's probably a lot like being stuck in DC during the inauguration. Like you're locked and you can't get out because they're shutting down the metro and buses and everything, that you can't move. So I'm glad I'm here. Physical security. So you can't drive a truck in a building anymore. What did the terrorists do? Not too far from here, they flew a plane into one. They thought of the next attack. So we create the Department of Homeland Security and beef up TSA, and they make our lives miserable every time we go get on a plane. And they started driving trucks into crowds. So the bad guys are thinking this way. Cybersecurity is the same way. And so, of course, for security professionals, the idea is get ahead of it. For companies like Acronis, they're trying to get ahead of it. What can they do for you to stop these things from corrupting your information, locking your information, and stealing the pictures of your friends and kids and every cool thing that you did that's sitting on your desktop? Well, I think in the future we're going to change the way, we're not going to, the bad guys are going to change some of the vectors. And I try to be a little bit of a futurist in how I think about technology, because that's how you disrupt, that's how you get ahead of it. So I was trying to think of some cool stuff that if I were a ransomware coder, if I wanted to make this, if I wanted to use it into the future, what would I do? I was thinking about where we're going. The first is self-driving cars. Now, cars are getting more and more technologically advanced. Most of them now have infotainment systems. You actually can hack into the infotainment system with an SD card. That's been done a number of times. Soon, I think that they're going to be connected so that your car is always connected. It's certainly going to be connected if it's a self-driving car. Imagine this scenario. You wake up and you're late. You got your cup of coffee in your hand. You got your bag, and you're running out the door. It's spilling all over the place. You've got to get downtown for a meeting. And if you miss this meeting, you're in a lot of trouble. And you jump into your brand new Tesla self-driving car, and the infotainment system comes up and you say, yeah, hey, Sally, you name it whatever you want, right? This is the future. You got to drive me to the office. And you get this clown that looks at you and says, pay me and I'll drive you. Because it's locked. Your car is locked with ransomware. This is where we're going with this if we don't stop it. And what do? You're going to be late. So you pay, by then it'll be, like, what, $1,200 in Bitcoin? But what if it's just $200 and they're locking all the cars for an entire car company? They can make a killing in one day. How about smart homes? The Internet of Things is a problem for malware. A lot of devices, a bunch of the devices that are probably in your home that you use, maybe it's a security camera, your router, your refrigerator, all sorts of things, ship just with default username and passwords, and you might know to change it or you might not change it. It's the sort of thing that's used for these big denial of dispute service attacks, the thing that took down Netflix and meant we couldn't watch it for a few days. What if you had a smart home that had a lot of this stuff and you could talk to it, right? Kind of like Google's trying to do and Amazon's trying to do. So what if you're in your home and your home is locked with ransomware and you can't get out? And they turn on the music and they find the song you can't stand anymore. It's Let It Go, and it's playing as loud as you can, and your 3-year-old is loving life, but you are ready to tear your ears off. Are you going to pay it? Well, you don't want to be stuck in your house. These are the kind of things that can happen. These are the kind of things that attackers are thinking of. Actually, in 2017, one of the things we're worried about the most are your smartphones and tablets being locked. How miserable would that be if you're out somewhere and you look at your phone and it's locked with ransomware and you can't get home, you need it, you can't get home to restore your backup that's sitting on whatever you're using, iTunes or whatever, on your desktop. So maybe you pay it. Maybe by then it's the only thing you've got. You don't have a wallet because you don't need it anymore. So it's troublesome. What can you do? Well, there are a few things that you need to do in order to deal with ransomware. The first is technology. You need to have software to combat this. You're not going to do it on your own unless you just take your laptop or your computer or any what we call endpoints offline, and you don't stick any thumb drives or DVDs or CDs or anything in it. But that doesn't work anymore. So you need software to combat that. There are plenty, and you're going to actually see demonstrations of a great product today. You need good cyber hygiene. Remember when I was talking about spear phishing and phishing attacks? Well, that means that when you get the email that tells you to click on a link, don't click on the link. It's that simple. I mean, it really is that simple. Don't click on the link. Don't open the attachment. Don't go to the website. When you get the email, delete it. If it's from Google, delete it. Type in www.google.com and go look at your account there. If it's from your bank, delete the email and go to your bank. By the way, your bank will never ask you to change your password right there in an email that takes you to a website. If they do, change your bank. They're probably embezzling from you anyway. And it's just what I call good cyber hygiene, being careful online. I mean, it might sound weird, but call your friend and say, hey, did you just send me these pictures because you misspelled 4 words in the email and it doesn't seem like you, right? Or do it anyway. If you're someone like me and, turn on 2-factor authentication, protect yourself that way. To get into all my different accounts, I got to get a text on my phone and then I enter in a code, and that protects from stuff happening to you like being John Podesta. Zero trust. Use technology that doesn't trust things to run on your systems. What that means is that it's going to block stuff you don't authorize. And once again, we're getting into software there. And then finally, if you want to stop ransomware, you have to have a good backup. Now, that doesn't mean you got to be like my buddy from New Zealand and take a drive and back everything up and then take it to your friend's house that you think is not going to burn down and stick it in their bookcase or their safe or something. But it does mean that you have to have a good system of backup. And as John said to lead us off, it's got to be separate than sitting on the laptop you're using. Here's why. There are a number of different ransomware, malware vectors that will not only lock your computer, but it will reach out and delete all the backup copies. It's pretty mean, right? So, if you're using Windows, they've got that Windows restore point, deletes all those. Shadow copies that are kept on your drive, deletes all those. Some of them will even reach out to the network drives if it can, and delete all those. Attackers are using non-malware-based attacks. There's something called PowerShell in Windows that lets admins do all sorts of things in Windows. If you have administrative credentials, attackers will get those administrative credentials and they'll go into different machines. This is complex, but bear with me. And by doing that, they can start loading ransomware throughout the entire network, not just your computer, but then you go to work and you plug in your laptop there and they get your work computer, and then they move through and they get your buddy's work computer, and then they get the server, and when IT finally figures it out, you're in a lot of trouble. So you do want to be careful. The other thing that I'm a little bit worried about is called a ransomware worm, and this is where you're using this sort of what I was just talking about, a PowerShell attack, to load ransomware on one person's system, and then the malware itself reaches out wherever it can and starts replicating, right? Infecting everything else it can touch until they've locked everyone you know. So you don't really want to be that person, unless you do, and you've got popcorn, and you want to lock 2 of your friends so you can go for free. So you're going to hear a little bit about Acronis tonight. Actually, when I'm done, there are going to be demos, and then the food will come back out, and you can join me over the bar because I need a drink. They have developed a new technology, and their technology does a little bit of what I've been saying. It's good stuff. It's good technology and the backup. Now, Acronis is known for backups. They're best in brand for the backups, and they've also created a technology that will verify your backup. That's pretty important, because it really sucks to restore your backup and you find out that you didn't trick the ransomware attacker, your backup's corrupted too, and you can't trust your data. Bad news. Just so you know, a recent study showed that 42% of IT professionals, these aren't you and I, these are people who are trained computer engineers who work as IT professionals for companies, were unsuccessful in recovering data. There's a couple reasons for that. One is that they didn't have a good backup, or their drives were corrupted. In a couple cases, they lost their backup drives. They shouldn't feel bad. The Secret Service lost backup tapes on the Metro. It's pretty embarrassing, right? They literally, this is how the Secret Service used to back things up. They would take tapes of the entire Secret Service backup, and one special agent who just had one job would get on the Metro in DC and ride it a few stops and bring it to where it had to go. And he left them there, and he got out, and he was like, and he got in, and he was like, oh no. Did you imagine that? I mean, it's like a manhunt for a bunch of tapes. The entire city was shut down. It was miserable. And some of it is because there can be a delay in backup. So what you want is something that backs up efficiently, quickly, rapidly, and also doesn't cause your computer to really slow down so you can't do what you want to do. So those are the important things that I think that Acronis would love to talk to you about right now. And I'll be here for a little bit tonight. So if you do have questions, I know there were a couple raised hands, I'm sorry. But I'll be here, and you can ask me, and I'll tell you everything I know about ransomware and catching spies and all that kind of cool stuff. Thank you.
Yikes! Just when you learn not to send your bank account number to that Nigerian prince. Well, let's hear it again for our 2 keynote speakers. Terrific stuff. You know, you guys are here because you've been to a Get Geeked event, you're a member of the Get Geeked community, then you're a geek and you need to know this stuff, and some of you already do know something about it. We have one more short presentation, a couple of housekeeping notes before we do that. Eric covered a little bit about that. After this next little presentation, food comes back, bar opens up, demos in the corner. After this next presentation, we are going to break these chairs out. So if you put your coat over it or something, take it with you. We got a few great people who are going to scoop these chairs out real quick. Our last presenter is the Vice President and General Manager of the Acronis consumer business. He's going to dive a little deeper into the new product. His name, and I've been practicing this, but I'll probably still screw it up, is Gaidar Magdanurov.
Okay, thank you, Barry.
How'd I do?
Thank you, Barry. I won't take too long. So I know that I'm in between you, food, and actually a demo. And we have people watching the online broadcast actually sending me messages that, oh, this backup thing, probably we should do it. So Eric really scared a lot of people, including my friends. And so after this presentation, we'll break down the chairs, and we'll have a demo running here by our security team. They will be connected online. They will be actually showing you the real ransomware infecting your computer, and they will show how it will stop the attack. Before I begin, I just will tell you a funny story. I have a friend of mine who was infected by ransomware, and he's kind of a security expert. And I asked him, why did he click on a link? And he told me, it was written, please click here. That's what I've done. But now I want to tell you just a few things about the product, and I won't have a lot of text on my slides, so don't worry, it won't be very complicated. But I want to tell you the story. So John already mentioned that we have a lot of data, we have a lot of complexity, a lot of new attacks. So more data, more devices, more complexity. It requires us to protect all the data and to own the data. So we have this challenge of data protection to protect data on multiple devices and multiple sources. So what we do with our product, Acronis TrueImage, is basically getting the data from your mobile computers, your mobile phones, iPads, iPhones, and getting into one secure place so you can actually own the data. That's why we provide backup for Mac, Windows, iOS, Android, and Facebook. So that's what we do. If you own a copy of your data, you can do something useful with your data. That's what we're trying to deliver. And as John mentioned, the data protection should be fast, easy, complete, and now it should be secure. After all this talks about ransomware, I believe that everyone understands that we need to be sure that we secure our data. So what was the old approach for backup? It's basically you have a backup, you hope you will never need it. It's like insurance, you hope you will never need it, but if something happens, then you spend time on recovering, and then you're realizing that maybe you have outdated backup, or your backup was corrupt, or something was wrong with it. So, but that was the old approach. The new approach that we promote, that we implement, is to be active in protecting data. So the goal for backup, for any backup solution, is to be able to recover your data fast and recover to the point where you had the most recent copy of your data. So that's what's important. And what we're trying to do with anything we develop on top of backup is to make this recovery time shorter and make you able to recover to the most recent state. So that's what we do with our new approach. So improving backup takes some innovation. And the things we develop, and I want to talk just about a few of them. So a few things that we developed in the Acronis TrueImage 2017 new generation is Acronis Active Protection against ransomware and blockchain-based services, Acronis Notary and Acronis ASign. And I'll talk about them in detail. Eric already told so many things that I got scared again about ransomware. Now I really think about ransomware infecting my fridge or something else in my home. And now everything's smart, so everything can be infected. That's kind of creepy. So the problem is growing, and we see that more and more consumers, more and more users, even IT professionals are getting infected and affected by this problem. So we tried to solve it. So what we've done, we built a technology that works on top of backup and helps backup to help you to recover your data if something happened. One thing we do, we protect the backup. So no one except the backup application, Acronis TrueImage, can actually access your backups. So ransomware is getting more and more sophisticated. It's trying to encrypt your backups, but we block it. So ransomware cannot attack your backups. We protect the backups that are in the cloud and that are stored locally. The other thing that ransomware is trying to do is it's trying to infect the backup application itself. We're trying to kill the backup application. We're protecting the application. But the most amazing thing that we do is the technology that actually allows you to detect the ransomware attack. So what we do is we sit on your computer and we track all the changes happening to your data. And if we see there's something suspicious going on, some changes to your file, some new applications trying to access multiple files on your computer, or trying to do something nasty with your files, then we actually do the immediate backup. So we take the changes, we have the subset of your data, the changes that were made by that application, we do the instant backup, and then we tell you, hey, there's something weird happening on your computer. Maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to stop it. And if you choose to stop it, we'll block the application completely, and we will recover the data instantly. So you'll get back the data that you had, the files that you had before the attack. That way, we're making the recovery time super short, super fast, and then we are making you get back to the state where you were before the attack. So this is the cool technology that is now absolutely necessary for any backup solution. We were the first one to develop it. The second thing that is important with backup is, what if you recovered something from your backup? How can you say if it's the original content or not? What if it was modified by someone? What if someone tricked you into modifying your data? How can you say if the data inside that important document or important file is actually the data that you had? So we came up with the way to do it using the blockchain technology, and Alex actually told about it a lot. So with blockchain technology, we can have a public ledger, an immutable ledger. We will have all the records about the content that you store in your notarized backup. And the way we do it, you do just a regular backup. You put your data into the cloud, into our secure cloud. So you always have a copy that is protected. And then we will create a little digital fingerprint, a little hash of the information that you have in that file, and put it into the blockchain. And that hash will reside there forever. So the thing is, any point of time in the future, you'll be able to take the file and compare it with what you have stored in the blockchain. Anyone can actually use the blockchain to generate this digital fingerprint and compare it to what is stored in blockchain. So we actually protect this data even from being modified by you. So if someone will trick you to modify your files, or someone will do something nasty with your files without you knowing it, you'll be able to say if it's the original document or not. So this is the natural addition to backup. So you're not only having a secure copy in your backup, but you have a way to prove that this is the original copy. And then on top of it, we're adding one more technology, Acronis A-Sign, ability to electronically sign documents. Because what we realize from talking to customers and from developing this technology is that more and more people are signing documents electronically. And every time you sign a document, you need to have the original. So if you sign something, it's important. If it's important, you should have a backup. It should be stored in a secure location. So what we do, we basically add this technology on top of backup. So you don't need to have a separate electronic signatures technology, or you don't need to have a separate backup for whatever you use for electronic signatures. And we believe that in the future, all of the important information will be signed, because some software vendors are taking care of the systems and applications. Copyright holders will take care of music and videos, but your user content, the document that you create, that's your responsibility. And everything of importance will be signed and will be backed up. So that's what we're introducing in our product. And of course, we're actually adding more and more features to our Acronis True Image New Generation. Not only those features, we're improving the mobile backup, so you can actually back up your mobile devices to local computers, to the cloud. You can view your cloud backups from your mobile device. We develop a feature that allows you to back up and recover Facebook. We're actually adding more and more different features, and you'll be able to see them in the product. So people in the online broadcast, you can actually start testing it right now. It's available on the website, and you'll be able to see it during the demos. And just one more thing. In all of the important presentations, there should be always one more thing. Just a few hours ago, we got the test results from a company that does tests for anti-malware. They took the 7 most popular backup applications that are available on the market and did the test and realized that True Image with the new technologies actually is #1. So it's protecting from almost all of the tests. You can get that research in our blog and our website, but that was a very, very, very nice thing to see, that our backup is currently the most secure backup out there in the market. And with that, I want to finish my presentation, and thank you all for coming. Now we'll have some time to see the demos, to get some food. So thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Gaidar. Okay, yeah. So we're going to break down this area, so make sure to take your stuff with you. One last thing, to borrow Gaidar's thing. Let's give Acronis a round of applause. Because if you guys, and I think most of you are familiar with what I do at Get Geeked Media, then you have to trust me when I tell you that not every backup software brand is throwing parties for consumers and bringing in great speakers. As a matter of fact, it's pretty unique in the category, I think. So again, let's hear it for Acronis. Everybody, food, drinks, demos, race cars. Have a good time. Thank you for coming.